It is, in many ways, the most difficult geopolitical national security challenge the nation has faced since 9/11.
We have many options for Venezuela, including a possible military option if necessary.
The president ups the ante in Venezuela, raising the possibility of military force. We will have a live report from Caracas.
Chaos in Charlottesville, white supremacists clash with counter-protesters, and 4 people die. We will take it to the roundtable.
Good morning. It is there. We begin this morning with the violence and hate among Americans riveting us all.
This morning, 4 men have been arrested in connection with the violent clashes between white supremacists and counter-protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia. And the U.S. Attorney's Office there has opened a civil rights investigation into the death of a woman who was killed by a car that plowed into a crowd of counter-protesters.
President Trump's advisors, including National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, called it terrorism. And the president himself appeared this weekend to denounce hate and bigotry, but stopped short of denouncing the white nationalist groups involved. Among the lawmakers who did, Senator Marco Rubio on Twitter denouncing specifically neo-Nazis, the KKK, and white supremacists by name.
Marco Rubio has the president's ear on many issues, including Cuba and Venezuela. We sat down with him late this week before the events in Charlottesville for a wide-ranging interview.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
Great to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
We're very happy you're here.
I'm happy to be here.
Senator Rubio, we are in the midst of this furious war of words between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, and it seems to get ratcheted up every day. Today, the president tweeted out that military solutions are now fully in place, locked and loaded, should North Korea act unwisely. This is a really perilous moment.
Yeah. So first I'd say that I understand that, you know, from the sort of public media perspective, the war on words is frightening, right? It looks like maybe we're escalating it. And my style would be different. I imagine almost anyone's style would be different. The president is clearly unorthodox. The flip side of it, though, is it has no practical impact, in my view. And Kim Jong-un wants a nuclear weapon and the ability to attack the United States for one very simple reason. It is an insurance policy. He looks at what happened to Saddam Hussein. He looks at what happened to Muammar Gaddafi. He believes he's going to wind up in the same place unless he has a nuclear weapon. He believes that's the ultimate insurance policy. He's not interested in conquering Japan. He's not interested in invading California. He's interested in being a dictator for another 50 years. And the insurance policy that keeps the United States from, or anybody from coming after him, is a nuclear weapon. That's not going to change whether Donald Trump is nice to him on Twitter or mean to him on Twitter.
But can we reconcile ourselves? I mean, we did with Russia and China developing nuclear weapons, and we somehow worked out an accommodation. Is there an accommodation that's possible with Kim Jong-un?
I find that to be very difficult to imagine for a couple of reasons. The first is those were systems. The Chinese Communist Party, the Soviet Communist Party, they were systems. They had multiple leaders. And at the end of the day, they were pragmatists in how they made their decisions. In essence, the Soviet Union didn't believe they could win a nuclear war. Kim Jong-un is an unstable individual. He's someone who has grown up his entire life the son of a dictator, the grandson of a dictator. So his psychology is one of someone who makes decisions in a very different way. And to have not just nuclear weapons, but ballistic missiles that can reach the mainland of the United States in the hands of someone like this is an unacceptable risk in my view. And the question really is, you know, how do you keep him from reaching that point, and what do you do about it if he gets close to it? And so obviously, I don't speak about this cavalierly, and all military options in North Korea bring incredible costs. You know, a massive attack against Seoul would cost the lives of potentially millions of people. But I think the moment is coming where Americans are going to have to make a decision, and our leaders, about whether we are willing to accept not just a nuclear North Korea, but one capable of striking the United States. It's a risk I believe is unacceptable.
You know, to your point, the instability of the North Korean regime, when the American people are seeing on Twitter locked and loaded or fire and fury, the American people are frightened. I'm sure you see that when you speak to your constituents. And yet then you see Secretary of State Rex Tillerson saying, hey, scale back, nothing to worry about. Is there a policy? What should American people know about what the U.S. policy is? You had a Senate Foreign Relations Committee on this very subject.
Well,
what is the policy?
So I think what the policy is in some ways not different from what it's historically been, which is the United States is not seeking to go in militarily and overthrow Kim Jong-un. I mean, it would be great for the North Korean people to have a different leader, but the policy of the United States is not, we're not going to invade them for that purpose. I think it's also the policy of the United States to make abundantly clear that any sort of military act against the U.S. or its allies would be met with swift and decisive force. In essence, I've said this before, and Kim Jong-un has to know this. The day he attacks America will be not just the last day of his life, but the last day of his regime. And I just think the President made abundantly clear in a tweet what everyone involved in this policy knows, and that is that if he ever attacks, it'll be one of the last things he does.
The North Korean generals, however, put out this unusually detailed statement saying in the middle of August we're going to send 4 intermediate-range missiles near Guam. Now, that would be certainly an aggressive act. Is that the kind of act that would necessitate the kind of huge response?
There's no doubt that if he were to launch anything that threatened U.S. territory or a U.S. ally, it would be met with a response. Obviously, it would be calibrated to meet the threat. But in the end, one thing we have to understand about Kim Jong-un is, you know, he didn't have a lot of people around him that give him differing opinions. This is not a person who travels the world. This is not someone who processes or receives information the way you do or I do. There is always the risk that he is overconfident and miscalculates and does something that goes beyond what he knows what the response is going to be.
We've heard a lot of people comparing this to the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of '62. Do you see that?
No, I think it's different. I think it's actually in some ways more dangerous. We had an established link of communication with the Soviets. At the end of the day, the Soviets were pragmatists about, they didn't want a nuclear war either. They understood no one was going to win that exchange. And Khrushchev ultimately looked for an out in that policy, and the Kennedy administration created a vehicle by which he could get an out while saving face. And it was one of the factors that ultimately cost Khrushchev his post, what was the way that went down. This is different. I mean, there is no established channel. He doesn't have a Politburo he's responding to. He's a one-man show. This is not a person who is processing information the way even Khrushchev did back in 1963. This is an individual that's incredibly isolated and unstable. And so it's a very risky situation. It's almost kind of something out of a Madman movie. I mean, it's frightening, but it's a reality.
Talking about what the U.S. response should be, I'm sure, as you said, only the President, Commander-in-Chief can do that. But, you know, we have seen these scenarios where the missile launching bases in North Korea are targeted, their nuclear facilities, and then you start thinking 26 million people live in Seoul. There are a couple of 100,000 United States, 23,000 military people, by the DMZ, 40,000 troops in Japan. I mean,
no, there's no doubt. I mean, there's no good options here. There's not some easy solution to this problem. This is not Iraq in 2003 where you could basically obliterate them in 2 weeks. This is not that kind of thing. There's no doubt. I think the likeliest escalation involves some sort of attack on South Korea. South Korea would respond with overwhelming conventional capabilities. Then the North Koreans would escalate that, and at some point could then threaten the lives of Americans. And there's where you think you could see, you know, you talk about the soldiers and American servicemen and women in South Korea they're on the armistice line. In some ways, it's terrible to say, but they're a tripwire force. In essence, if they are attacked, that trips a wire that involves an additional American action. As far as the particular military options before the President, I know he has them. Obviously, those aren't discussed publicly. But he has a variety of options and a sequence of escalation that doesn't involve all-out war at the back end.
Senator, let's move on to Venezuela, a subject very dear to your heart. You've been right at the center of the discussion and the policy discussion. What's it going to take to restore Venezuela to a democratic state?
A free and fair election. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's all it's been asked for. There's no guarantee that the winner of that election is going to be pro-American or vote with us at the UN or the OAS. But that's what the Constitution of Venezuela calls for. And what Maduro and the people around him have done is they've suspended that process because they know they can't win. What really complicates things in Venezuela is these individuals around Maduro, many of them are implicated in all sorts of crimes, both against their own people and drug trafficking and money laundering. So they're fearful that a future government would extradite them to the United States. So they are basically in a no man's land where they're kind of backed up against the corner. On the other hand, you've never seen such regional unity like you have right now.
17 Latin American nations just
speaking out without even the U.S. at the meeting. So they did it on their own, and so it shows an incredible amount of regional unity. And I think one of the reasons for that is you have to think this out into the future. If they are able to pull this off, where they've basically nullified a constitutional democracy and replaced it with a Cuban-style system, you now have an oil-rich nation that over time is going to try to replicate that and support elements like that in Colombia, in Honduras, in Guatemala. They already have that in Nicaragua. You're halfway there in El Salvador and potentially in Mexico with Obrador. And suddenly, within 5 years, you could have an arc of anti-democratic, anti-American forces stretching from Venezuela all through Central America for the most part and right up to the U.S. border. And that's why you see some of these nations so intently involved in this effort. They understand this is part of a broader objective in the long term. It too is concerning.
So you had tweeted out then it's time for significant economic sanctions. So what does that mean practically speaking? Tougher than on individuals as
so there are sectors of their economy that do nothing to benefit the people, but are most definitely benefit the regime. So the reason how Maduro's keeping that country together at this point is he has tens of thousands of people that are loyal to him, not of ideology. They're loyal because their families still remain in a privileged position. They used to get cars and houses, now they get toilet paper and toothpaste, but it's still more than what the average Venezuelan is getting. When he can no longer provide that for them, that's the glue that holds this together. And it would cause a lot of them to say Maduro's no longer worth the trouble. And so there are sectors that allow us to, people always speculate about oil, but one of the things you have to understand is the way that Maduro's carrying this out is he sells these oil bonds and he's selling them at a discount. So $1 million worth of bonds for $400,000. And then he takes the $400,000 in cash, and that's just a number I'm making up, that's not the actual number, but he takes $400,000, 8 or 9% of that, he spreads it out to keep regime loyalty. And the rest, he pays the interest on the existing debt. Yeah. So 6 months later, he can come back out to the credit markets and do it again.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to pick up where we left off with Senator Rubio and turn to Cuba and tax reform when we come right back.
Welcome back. We are going to check in shortly with Local 10's reporter Cody Weddle in Caracas on the latest developments there.
First, though, back to our interview with Senator Marco Rubio and his take on the crisis in Venezuela. A Sunday when we were on the air, actually, there was a little uprising, a little spark of a rebellion at one of the military bases. We've had people talk to us and say there is no hope for any sort of protest to go anywhere, no opposition to go anywhere without military force. What do you make of that? Yeah. Where is that going?
Well, to me, I think one of the more frightening scenarios is when there reaches a point where the anti-Maduro or pro-democracy people in the country feel like they have only two options because they lose trust in their opposition leaders that are in the National Assembly. Let's say they lose any trust in them because this notion that somehow these opposition leaders control the street is not true. Mm-hmm. They don't. I mean, they can convey, they can convene, but ultimately the people on the street are very angry and have a series of grievances against the government. So when these people reach a point where they feel like there's no hope through our elected National Assembly, there's only two ways forward: armed rebellion or asylum. And both of those have severe implications. The armed rebellion, of course, would involve violence and loss of life and instability. And asylum would involve, thousands of people that are fleeing the country to Colombia, to Brazil, obviously to the United States. So that's my biggest fear, is that they lose hope. If the world's attention turns away, the problems still exist. And what is going to be the escape valve for the opposition? And I fear it will become civil war, which we don't support. We don't want a coup d'etat. I don't want a military coup d'etat in Venezuela. I want them to have an election. I want them to have an election for president. I want them to have an election for governors and regional councils the way the law requires it. And they're not going to do that in a fair way because they can't win one.
So this week, the Miami-Dade Commission had voted to, well, on a lot of different components to a resolution, but really the only practical aspect was to encourage the administration to offer temporary protected status to Venezuelans now, TPS, just like Haitians, Salvadorans, Hondurans have. Is that something that you would be in favor of with
Generally,
what's going on?
I am. I mean, I think you can't deport someone back to a situation like that, especially if they fear for their lives. I think the bigger problem, though, is if you talk to Venezuelans, while they would welcome TPS in the short term, they want to be Venezuelans. They want to live in Venezuela, and they don't want this to have to be necessary. So I think it's an issue we'll have to confront, because otherwise you're going to have people here that are going to overstay because they're not going to go back, and then you're going to face a situation where are we going to really deport them back to that system?
We learned this week about this disturbing incident last fall in Havana, where these powerful electronic listening devices were used by somebody, maybe the Cubans, maybe the Russians, maybe both, and a couple of U.S. diplomats had severe hearing loss, and a Canadian diplomat as well. What do you make of this?
I hold the Cubans 100% responsible. I don't care what the nationality was of the individuals that harmed our people. This is one of the most tightly controlled societies in the world, certainly one of the most tightly controlled societies in the Western Hemisphere. Cuba is not a place where people can move around and do whatever they want without someone knowing about it. So either they did it, or they know who did it and didn't prevent it. But I hold them responsible for that, and we should hold them responsible for that. And now the Canadians have come out and said they had someone harmed as well.
Right. Well, in the government, the Trump administration, Treasury, and other departments are in the process of writing the rules and regulations for this revised policy towards Cuba. Will this incident have an impact on what those rules and regulations
Well,
say?
certainly if we can identify the individuals or entities responsible for it, they would be among the sanctioned entities. But by and large, I think it reaffirms the need for it. And to understand this change, because there's been a lot of reporting on it that's not fully accurate, I think I would know, since we were certainly involved in helping to craft it. The purpose of this regulation, the purpose of this change in policy, is to ensure that to the extent Americans are traveling to Cuba and spending money there, they are spending as much of it as possible directly with individual Cubans and their small businesses. You know, one of the selling points of the Obama policy was that they had this surging entrepreneurial class. I said, great, then let's empower them by putting them in a privileged situation versus Gaesa and the military-owned entities. You've seen already the Cuban response has been to crack down on the entrepreneurial class, but for the first time in many years, the Cuban people now know that the reason why they can't own a business has nothing to do with the United States. It has to do with the Cuban government.
Tax reform has been on your agenda, been on the congressional agenda, the president's agenda, but if you fail to repeal and replace Obamacare, how do you move on to tax reform?
Well, I would say two things about it. One of the things that made Obamacare repeal and replace so difficult is we don't have one insurance market. We have 50 plus individual territories. Right. Every state has its own dynamics, both how it handles Medicaid and how it handles the individual market. Tax reform, federal taxes are the same everywhere. So I think that's the one. The other is a lot of these ideas are not even partisan. I think both sides agree that our business tax rates need to be made more competitive. The debate is about what do you do with the money that it should generate, because or how do you pay for it if it costs you money. The part of it I'm most focused on, I'm in favor of all the business stuff, but the part of it I'm most focused on is increasing the child tax credit. If you look at what working families are spending per child today, you know, we've been having these roundtables across the state. There are families that are making $800 a week and spending $300 of it on child care. It's an extraordinary cost, and so we want to have a tax credit that's easier to use, bigger, to account for the growth and the cost of raising children. And by the way, more focused on people that may not even have an income tax liability, because if they make less than a certain amount of money, the primary tax they pay is FICA. We wanted to apply against the payroll tax.
Senator Marco
Great
Rubio,
to have you here.
Great to have you in. Thank you very much.
Thanks for doing this.
Not long after that interview with Senator Rubio Friday, President Trump raised the possibility of U.S. military action in Venezuela.
And we will have a live report from our man in Caracas after the break. Now on to the deteriorating situation in Venezuela. President Trump on Friday afternoon said he is now considering several options for dealing with the crisis there, including a military option.
Let's get right to our colleague in Caracas today. Cody Weddle is right there, as always, with the latest. Cody, good afternoon.
Good morning, Glenna. Good afternoon, Glenna and Michael. Shocking statements from Trump this week, as you mentioned. Also, we are learning just yesterday the Constituent Assembly here, which is in charge of writing a new constitution here, they have decided to move up elections that were scheduled from December. They will move those now to October. So just like that, we have elections here scheduled in October. Those will be for 23 governors across Venezuela, and it's still unclear why they're trying to do this. The opposition for now does plan to participate in those elections. There was some controversy as to whether they would participate because many parts of the opposition saying that they would be validating the electoral authority here, which they say is guilty of fraud. But for now, they say they will participate. So we have elections here in Venezuela in 2 more months.
Cody, a question for you. This comment that President Trump made on Friday afternoon, doesn't it really play into Maduro's hands? He can now say the imperialists are threatening our sovereignty and come behind, get behind me?
Absolutely, and that's why this is so confusing as to why Trump would say this. We've seen time and time again that when the United States does things like this, that Maduro is able to solidify his base, and actually his approval ratings go up. Something similar happened back in 2015 when the Obama administration, in an effort to sanction some Venezuelan authorities, declared Venezuela a threat to the United States. When they did that, there was a huge campaign here denouncing that move by the United States, and we saw Maduro's approval ratings go up. So in many ways, it seems like this whole this statement by Trump was in some ways crafted here in Caracas, because in many ways it does help President Maduro.
Cody, you probably know Vice President Pence is on a week-long Latin American trip today. Later today, he'll be meeting with Colombia's president. Any talk there as the vice president goes to meet with Latin American countries fully supportive of the U.S. policy and against the Maduro moves, now that the president has sort of threatened military action is possible?
Well, we will see what Pence can do in the region. The problem has been sort of getting together a coalition to really put sanctions or do something else in a group to put pressure on Maduro. And remember, that has time and time again failed within the Organization of American States, because Venezuela still has significant influence in many countries in the Caribbean, and they're not able to get the votes needed in Caribbean countries to really put pressure on Maduro. So we will see if Pence will be able to in some ways put together some type of coalition, which would have to include some countries that have been traditional allies of Venezuela, perhaps Ecuador, perhaps Cuba. But for now, that seems pretty unlikely.
Cody Weddle in Caracas today. Thanks so much for your report, as always.
And up next, we're going to, round up the roundtable. So many things happened this week that now demand analysis and, yes, some informed opinion. And, of course, that's where the roundtable comes in.
And we have a great roundtable today. Introductions first. Tim Padgett is the Americas correspondent for WLRN, Miami Herald News, covering Latin American and the Caribbean. Mary Lee Cancio is a Miami-based attorney and active member of the Republican Party. H.T. Smith is a veteran Miami attorney, a civil rights leader, and a law professor at Florida International University. Welcome aboard, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good
Thank
morning.
you.
We are so glad you were here. H.T., if I can begin with you, these pictures that we have seen coming out of Charlottesville are shocking. The violence, the hatred, the fights in the streets. But to think that in the city that is the home of the University of Virginia, founded by Thomas Jefferson, although he was a slave owner, to have this blatant white supremacy, it shocks the conscience.
And it was selected intentionally because of a series of things, not only the passage you've talked about, but they've had a series of discussions among good white people and good black people and brown people about where do we go in this country with regard to race. Mm-hmm. And most people in America, white, black, brown, are good people, Republicans and Democrats. And that's why when we have an act of domestic terrorism like this, you cannot remain silent. You must speak up. So when David Duke says that we, the 12 neo-Nazi and racist groups, came to Charlottesville to fulfill Donald Trump's promise of making America great again, taking the country back again, with the subtext being making America white again, we, white, black, Republican and Democrat, must speak out. I was very encouraged this morning to see the tweets from Republicans and Democratic leaders. But all people must speak out against this. This is not the America of 2017. And the people who are doing the protesting, the people who are doing the domestic terrorism, they feel they're losing, and they should be losing. And we should continue to let them know there's no place for you in the America of the future.
The country yesterday looked to the president for his reaction, which came, it was actually a few hours later. Mary Lee, I wanted to get your take on the reaction initially from President Trump, who came out in Bedminster, appeared before the American public, had some tough words, but blamed, his words, many sides. And those words are really getting a lot of attention this morning without being very directly harsh at the people and groups and hate groups involved.
I disagree with that, Glenna. I think, unfortunately, you're putting emphasis on the last sentence of what he said. He condemned in the strongest sense all hatred and bigotry and racism in this country. Now, when he says many sides are to blame, you know, we saw what happened in Virginia with Steve Scalise, for example. We have fringe elements in both sides that are causing riots in this country. Now, when we saw this group, this national group of white supremacists that convened in Virginia, what, a couple of hundred people showed up? So we're giving them more relevance than they deserve. They got a permit to go protest, and then when we saw this criminal act by this evil man that killed someone, that is horrible, but that does not represent who America is, who Donald Trump supporters are. And I think that the words of the president they're focusing on one thing when he uses other things, when his entire family administration came out and said, we're against this.
All right, he denounced intolerance, bigotry, and hatred, but Tim Padgett, he really made a moral equivalence, I think, between the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, and the Black Lives Matter and the other people who were there protesting against them.
And in the context of what happened this weekend, that's exactly the problem. You can say that he was condemning all kinds of racism, bigotry, etc., but yesterday this racism, bigotry was being perpetrated by a particular group, white supremacists, racists, bigots, Nazis, whatever you want to call them. What stands out to me is that his failure to condemn them directly, it's almost as if he's suggesting, I can't condemn these people because I risk insulting my base, and tacitly suggesting to us that his base is these people. And where that takes us politically into the future is a little scary for me.
Well, and let me say, as a black man, that I know that all of the supporters of Donald Trump are not racist. But I do know that all racists and neo-Nazis are supporters of Donald Trump. And so there's a good section of his supporters who he has given the wink, he's given the dog whistle to. Look, when he denounced Ted Cruz, he called him by name, insinuated his wife was ugly, and his father was involved in the assassination of JFK. When he talked about the media, he said the media is an enemy of the people. He usually denounces by identifying who he's attacking. This is not just in isolation. You go back and look at the birtherism. You look at what happened in the casinos, where blacks could not be in the casino when certain people didn't want them there. This is problematic, but we have enough Republicans who are good and decent who can stand up to this and get the president to come out of the woodwork and say, I do not want the support of KKK or Nazis. I am against it.
And Mary Lee, I have to say, as a kind of a corollary to that, this morning, Marco Rubio, among others, issued strong statements saying we must name the white supremacists, we must name those who are perpetrating intolerance and violence and hatred. And, and as HT says, there were a whole range of members of Congress, including prominent Republicans, who said the president should have said this. He should have said, I denounce white supremacists.
Absolutely. I would like to hear that as well. But I think when he made his statement, he encompassed everybody. He says, I'm against all forms. So I believe that it includes them, but perhaps he will give another statement.
Where do you think the most trusted advisors of the president are? Ivanka Trump and her husband, Jared Kushner, who are Orthodox Jews.
She issued a Twitter this morning condemning by name all those groups.
Well, you talk about his advisors, Steve Bannon, Michael Vogt, Sebastian Gorski, Stephen Miller, and Attorney General
The
Jeff
alt-right.
Beauregard Sessions.
Yeah.
When you surround yourself like people like that, my mother told me, be careful who you surround yourself with because you will be them. And that's what's happening.
And that image of the torches is chilling, and especially in the Jewish context that you were just referring to. And again,
this is like Germany, 1937. I think of the Kristallnacht, and here's the video of both the fighting, but of the torches.
Or America in the 1920s.
Do you know who's very happy
or
today?
in the South, yes.
The one person that should be very happy today is George Soros, because a lot of the fringe elements.
Please, how? George Soros? He didn't sponsor. Do you think
know
he
that?
paid? Do you think he paid?
I can tell you for a fact that at the Republican National Convention and even at the inaugural, there were elements that were clearly paid by.
We're talking about what happened Saturday
and
Friday night in Charlottesville.
And I'm telling you that someone like him would be very happy. That's my opinion. I mean, that's why you bring me here to give my opinion that may not be in agreement with everybody else.
I welcome your opinion,
Thank
and
you.
I don't know what George Soros has to do with anything that happened in Charlottesville. I do want to go back and say that these white supremacists on Friday night were marching in, and they were chanting, "Take America back. You will not replace us, and Jews will not replace us." They're not just racist, they're anti-Semitic.
Well, and the only encouraging signal I see here is that these incidents seem to be reflecting a bit of desperation.
Yes.
On the part of what, as I said before, Trump seems to be tacitly suggesting is his base. And that base is going to diminish even more greatly after the appalling images that the rest of America is seeing this weekend. So this is what befuddles me politically, is how he can still be so loyal to a base that is obviously shrinking and is going to be shrinking even further after this weekend.
But when you see crimes committed by radical Islam, you say, well, that's not all Muslims, you protect that. When you see those horrible acts being committed, oh, that's Trump's base. That's ridiculous. That is not Trump's base.
That's a good point.
That's part of Trump's base, however. David Duke said that this was a turning point. No, this is a last stand. This is the last stand of the white supremacists. This is the last stand of the neo-Nazis. America for the future will not have a place for them.
I didn't mean to suggest that was his entire base. That's a very good point.
All right. So everybody hold your thoughts. We're going to come back. More roundtable after a break.
Oh, yes. I like it.
We are back with a great roundtable this morning. Need to talk about Venezuela. We had Cody Weddle, our correspondent in Caracas, report just a few minutes ago that there is now an election scheduled for municipal heads of cities and Tim Padgett in October. This election, will it do anything but cement the power of the Maduro regime?
Well, the Maduro regime never makes a move like this, in this particular context, moving up an election, unless it's meant to disadvantage the opposition. And so I think what's behind this moving up of these regional elections, which were originally scheduled for December and now they're moving up to October, is probably to just catch the opposition at a disadvantage, make it harder for them to get prepared for these elections, as if they don't have enough problems already, getting themselves unified, et cetera. So I think what's happening is it gives them a chance to put the opposition off guard, and at the same time sort of burnish their terrible international image, saying, look, you wanted elections from us, we'll not only hold them, we'll move them up for you.
And first of all, I want to commend our diplomats for their efforts behind the scenes to get 17 Latin American countries to come together in Peru, and even some of them even called Maduro a dictator. Yeah. We did not have the best record with regard to Latin America in terms of coups, in terms of regime change, and so we're really moving in the right direction. But after the president made that unfortunate statement that he made, really he threw a lifeline, at least in terms of time, for Maduro. And I'm hopeful that the vice president's trip today in Colombia, where he's going to, as Tim said, he's going to get an airful.
He did something even more serious than that, HT.
Okay.
He put the liberty, if not the lives, of a lot of opposition leaders inside Venezuela in danger. I just spoke last week with the mayor of Lecheria, coincidentally the town where my in-laws live in Venezuela. He had to take a clandestine route out of Venezuela because he is under arrest there. They've already sentenced him to 15 months in prison for simply allowing protests, anti-government protests, to take part in his town. He finally escaped here to South Florida, talked to him in Doral, and one of the points he made was that we are being hunted down. The last thing opposition leaders like him needs is for President Trump to say we are considering military action against Venezuela and put an even bigger target on those people's backs.
Right, so he's already here, and now it's Trump's fault that he has a target on his back.
No, I'm talking about the opposition leaders who are still back in Venezuela.
No, a lot of people inside Venezuela, when they conducted their own elections before the Constituyente, they voted, you know, millions of people came out and voted again, saying we don't want this. So it's another farce election. I disagree. I don't think that people should participate in something that the government is going to commit fraud again. Didn't they say they had 8.8 million people voting on this fraud last weekend? I mean, it's just ridiculous that you're going to participate in something that you're going to validate an election that they're going to give you false results.
The conditions may not be good, but they have to take part in these elections.
They have been doing
one
it.
of the biggest mistakes the Venezuelan opposition made was 12 years ago when they boycotted parliamentary elections and essentially handed the National Assembly in Venezuela on a silver platter to Hugo Chavez and set their efforts to bring him down back by years. They can't afford to do that again.
I agree with you, but I think are different times. 12 years later, what we're seeing is we have a dictatorship in Venezuela, and that's what when calling to the White House and said they want to speak with President Trump, after, last week he says, I'm not talking to the leader of Venezuela until he's
all the more
elected.
reason why they have to stay on the Venezuelan voters' radar. Well, that means taking part in these elections.
But opposition got control of the National Assembly not by boycotting, but by participating.
Exactly.
And it made a fraud of the Supreme Court when the Supreme Court said, we're going to take over their powers. So I think there's a legitimate disagreement, Mary Lee, about that. I'd say stay and fight. Fight in the courts, fight in the legislature, fight in the ballot box, and if necessary, fight in the streets.
All right, let's move on to, I think, the gravest international situation we have seen in a long time. Marco Rubio, when Glenna and I interviewed him, said he thinks what's going on with North Korea is more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, HT, when you hear this war of words between Kim Jong-un and President Trump, fire and fury, we're locked and loaded, and then Kim Jong-un has said even more onerous and provocative things. I mean, this is very serious stuff.
Right. We expect around the world to hear from the dictators and the little people, the Fidel Castros, the Idi Amins, the Hugo Chavez, that kind of talk. I'd like to remind all of us, including your viewers, of what Jackie Kennedy said to Khrushchev in a letter after her husband was assassinated. She said, and I quote, "You and he were adversaries, but you were allied in a determination that the world should not be blown up. The danger which troubled my husband was that war might be started not so much by the big men as by the little ones. While big men know the needs for self-control and restraint, little men are sometimes moved more by fear and pride. Out-crazing Kim Jong-un is a scary proposition."
Although this morning, Martha Raddatz, an ABC correspondent, foreign affairs correspondent, is at the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. She reported, Mary Lee, there is no sign of any pending conflict.
I don't know. All we have is a threat that, he was going to attack Guam by the 15th. The 15th is 2 days away. That's all that I know.
That would be an act of aggression that would have to be responded to, according to Senator
some people,
Rubio.
Some people are saying no. Some people are saying, why attack if it's going to go 20 miles off course, and why respond? And I think we absolutely need to respond.
But President Trump has already said that would be an act of aggression. But anyway, in the 45 seconds that are left, let's just say goodbye to Jeffrey and Luria. The Miami Marlins are going to be sold.
Good riddance.
And we've got Derek Jeter and this gentleman from Naples, big investor. So
We all agree on that.
Yeah,
we were very
Let's
happy.
hope this franchise can reconnect with the community again. Giancarlo Stanton just smacked his 40th home run.
41st.
41st now, and yet we're
right?
still setting records for low attendance.
Can I be the one
Marlins
to say
Park.
it's not a done deal yet? Can I be that?
You can, but I can go to Miami Marlins games again.
Not yet, not yet.
Me too, me too.
There's
All right.
so
Well,
much to do.
maybe we'll go together.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all very much. Great roundtable still to come. My personal perspective about the power of a president's words.
Take a look at this picture, the port of Key West, and this is our Key West cam.
And here is Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa with our Sunday forecast. Jen.
Good afternoon, Michael and Glenna. Good afternoon, South Florida. Nice and sunny for Miami. There are just some pop-up showers beginning to develop, but they're isolated. Meanwhile, the temperature already warming up to 92 degrees in Miami, still at 89 in Fort Lauderdale, but all of South Florida, you'll be reaching those lower to mid-90s by the middle of today. The breeze is out of the east and southeast, very light winds though, and as far as on the radar, just tracking 2 showers, one over the Hollywood area and then down into North Miami and by Wynwood, but these showers are very small and they're quick movers. So pop-up showers and storms can still happen mainly on the west side, and then the similar story for tomorrow is expected. However, later Monday, some of those showers that pop up during the afternoon will track on eastward. As far as the temperature for today, it's a high of 94, 93 tomorrow. It's going to be steamy. The rain chance goes up even higher just a bit Tuesday and Wednesday. Michael?
Jennifer, thank you very much. All right, before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about the power of a president's words. Whatever a president says carries enormous weight. It's heard around the world. President Trump doesn't seem to know or care about the ramification of things that he says or doesn't say. Yesterday, he didn't say the words white supremacist, but he should have. And then on Friday, he made this startling comment about Venezuela.
We have many options for Venezuela. And by the way, I'm not going to rule out a military option. We have many options for Venezuela.
I wonder how much forethought went into that remark, incredibly damaging comment, tossed off so casually. Mr. Trump loves to shoot from the hip. This time he shot himself in the foot, and he set back U.S. relations with Latin America by eons. Threatening to send U.S. troops into Venezuela is the last thing a president should be talking about. All the goodwill the U.S. has built up recently in Latin America dissipated in that second. The U.S. has a long and not very proud history of meddling in Latin America and the Caribbean. We invaded Grenada and Panama. We overturned the government of Guatemala. We occupied Haiti, sent troops into the Dominican Republic. We helped stage a coup in Chile. And oh yes, we tried to murder Fidel Castro and imposed an embargo in Cuba. No wonder the U.S. has been viewed with fear and loathing by so many in Latin America. Relations did improve when President Obama renewed diplomatic ties with Cuba, and just this week, 17 Latin American countries signed a document in Lima condemning the Maduro regime for stealing democracy in Venezuela. So just when we were building a coalition that really could force big and positive changes in Venezuela, along comes President Trump with his threat of military force. This is about as boneheaded as it gets. Someone in the White House, someone like John Kelly, needs to brief the president on the checkered history of American involvement in Latin America. There is no reason now or in the foreseeable future for the U.S. to send troops to be sending in troops to Venezuela. They need our help. They do not need our troops. That is my perspective for this week. Hope you have a great Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
And we would love to hear what you think. We invite you to weigh in on that or any topic you like via email, Facebook, Twitter. Get in touch with us at any of these addresses. We are so easy to find. Have a beautiful Sunday.
And we hope you have a great Sunday.
We do.